and today I'm going to be reading chapter 12 of The Princess and the Goblin. Pairing with today's story, I'm going to be having some freshly squeezed iced lemonade because it feels like summer today and I just want to keep that going in what I drink. It's good. As always, pour yourself something yummy to drink. Relax, enjoy, and cheers. Chapter 12, a short chapter about Curdy. Curdy spent many nights in the mine. His father and he had taken Mrs. Peterson into the secret, for they knew Mother could hold her tongue, which was more than that could be said of all the miners' wives. But Curdy did not tell her that every night he spent in the mine, part of it went in earning a new red petticoat for her. Mrs. Peterson was such a nice, good mother. All mothers are more or less, but Mrs. Peterson was nice and good, all more and no less. She made a little heaven in that poor cottage on the hillside, for her husband and son to go home to, out of the dreary earth in which they worked. I doubt if the princess was very much happier, even in the arms of her great, huge great-grandmother, than Peter and Curdy were in the arms of Mrs. Peterson. True, her hands were hard and chapped and large, but it was with work for them, and therefore, in the sight of the angels, her hands were so much more the beautiful. And if Curdy worked hard to get a petticoat, she worked hard every day to get him comforts which he would have missed much more than she would a new petticoat, even in winter. Not that she and Curdy ever thought of how much they worked for each other. That would have spoiled everything. When left alone in the mine, Curdy always worked on for an hour or two first, following the lode which, according to Glump, would lead at last into the deserted habitation. After that, he would set out on reconnecting expedition. In order to manage this, or rather the return from it, better than the first time, he had bought a huge ball of fine string, having learned the trick from Hop o' Thumb, whose history his mother had often told him. Not that Hop o' Thumb had ever used a ball of string. I should be sorry to be supposed so far out in my classics, but the principle was the same as that of the pebbles. The end of the string he fastened to his pickaxe, which figured as no bad anchor, and then, with the ball in his hand, unrolling as he went, set out in the dark through the natural gangs of the Goblin's territory. The first night or two he came upon nothing worth remembering, saw only a little bit of home, life of the cobs in the various caves they called houses, failed in coming upon anything to cast light upon the foregoing design, which kept the induction of the present in the background. But at length, I think on the third or fourth night, he found, partly guided by the noise of the implements, a company of evidently the best sappers and miners among them hard at work. What were they about? It could not well be the inundation, seeing that had in the meantime been postponed to do something else. Then, what was it? He lurked and watched every now and then in the greatest risk of being detected, but without success. He had again and again to retreat in haste, a proceeding rendered the more difficult since he had to gather up his string and he returned upon its course. It was not that he was afraid of the goblins, but that he was afraid of their finding out they were watched, which might have prevented the discovery at which he aimed. Sometimes his haste had to be such that, when he returned home toward morning, his string, for lack of time to wind it up as he dodged the cobs, would be in what seemed the most hopeless entanglement. But, after a good sleep, though a short one, he always found his mother had got it right again. There it was, wound in a most respectable ball, ready for the use the moment he should want it. "I can't think how you do it, Mother," he would say. "I follow the thread, just as you do in the cave," she answered. She never had more to say about it, but the less clever she was with her words, the more clever she was with her hands, and the less his mother said, the more Curdy believed she had to say. But still, he had made no discovery as to what the Goblin miners were about. Now this is indeed a short chapter about Curdy, but unlike the title suggests, it's a little less about Curdy and a little more about his mother. The chapter serves as an ode to her and to all good mothers. For so much we've heard about Curdy, we've heard about how he has been built up into the young man he is, or the young boy he is, by his father, and the things his father has taught him, and the things his father has done for him, the way his father has supported him. And in this chapter, we get to see a glimpse of a character who, in truth, we don't see very much of, and that is his mother. The fact that an entire chapter is dedicated to showing the influence and power his mother has, I think, is something noteworthy and important. Now, firstly, we hear the usual domestic qualities, which after a while can feel a little tedious, but the promotion of the positive domestic was something common, especially for Victorian practice, which George MacDonald is a Victorian author. And so, yes, the first positive thing we see is a little bit old hat, because we like to think women are more than just what they do in the home. But the first thing we see is, she creates a beautiful home. Out of very little, she's able to make quite a lot. The second thing worthwhile we see about his mother is that it is his mother who's taught him a way in which to safely navigate the caves. And she's done this through telling him stories, specifically the story of Hop o' My Thumb. Fairy tales set out for children a strategic way to problem solve. And for Curdie, the way in which Hop o' Thumb uses pebbles to track his way and find his way back, he is then able to think, I can do something similar, and he buys a piece of string. So we see his mother's support and aid in the way that she has gifted through story the ability for innovation and cleverness, which allows Curdie to explore the mines. The third thing we see is the help that his mother silently gives. Every night, despite his trying to keep that ball of string wound up the same way it unwound, it ends up as a ball of knots as he's running from the cobs and he's in a hurry to get out of there. And so he comes home, he's exhausted, and this ball of thread, which should be neatly wound, is just all knots, and it's going to be no use for tomorrow's adventure. Except every morning when he wakes up, his mother has been able to undo the knots and to set it straight again. And this brings me to the fourth and final thing that I like about this chapter and what it highlights about Curdie's mom, and that is the wonder she is able to instill in him. Firstly, in her almost magic-like ability to undo this ball of knots and to have it all set back as it was. And secondly, in the way that she speaks to her son, she creates this sort of aura of wonder around her. When he comments and says, I don't know how you do this, Mom, how you undo the knots and get it all set straight, she simply replies that she just follows the string, the same way that he does when he's in the cave. And I think that this is really neat because she draws a parallel with herself and Curdie in the way that wherever he goes with this ball of string, wherever that line goes and where it comes back, she almost, in a way, as she undoes the knots every single night while he sleeps, she's tracing over where he's been in the cave. In a way, she's tracing over his steps, following him in this adventure, for every knot, for every turn, for every twist. She sees that in this ball of knots that she undoes, and she creates a parallel between herself and her son, and that this adventure he goes on, he doesn't go on alone. There's lots more I'd love to talk about Curdie's mother with, but right now I'm going to have to hold on to it because as we get further into the story, there's better opportunity to talk about Curdie's mother and Irene's great-grandmother, and I can't wait to do that, but I'm going to have to until we have more story. As always, I hope whatever you've been drinking has been good, that the story and conversation have been a fair match. Cheers and cheers. Chapter 12. The Hall of the Goblin Palace. The next chapter is called The Cob Creatures. Guess who we're gonna meet?